All right, so today we're diving into something I think a lot of people considering LASIK are curious about. LASIK enhancement. Like what happens if, the first procedure doesn't quite hit the mark?
Yeah, it's like, when you're researching something really important like LASIK surgery,
Hmm,
you really want to be thorough, right? You want to know what all the possibilities are.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here for. Just a really quick recap for anyone who needs it. LASIK uses a laser to reshape your cornea, which is that front part of your eye that's clear, and that's how it corrects your vision, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, LASIK boasts like a 95% satisfaction rate.
Yeah, 95%. I mean, that's incredibly high. No wonder it's such a popular choice for vision correction. But like any medical procedure, there's always a chance that, well, things might not go exactly as planned. That's where LASIK enhancement comes in.
Okay, so this enhancement, how common are we talking? Is this something like a lot of people need?
Not really, no. I mean, the research actually shows that LASIK enhancements are much less common than the initial procedure itself. It's more about, just being aware of it.
That's reassuring to hear.
Sure.
But in the cases where it is needed, what are the reasons?
So, the most common reason, and this might seem a bit odd at first, is something called persistent poor vision.
Persistent poor vision.
Okay. What that means is even after the initial LASIK healing period, which is usually, like 3 months or even longer, some people might find that their vision isn't quite as sharp as they had hoped. Or, like, maybe it's still a little blurry in certain situations.
So even if the LASIK procedure and the initial recovery, even if that all goes smoothly, some people just, their vision doesn't quite stabilize the way everyone hoped.
Exactly. It just goes to show that, everyone's eyes are different. I mean, just like we all have unique fingerprints, our eyes heal differently too. So while most people, they follow a pretty predictable healing pattern, there can be slight variations. And in those cases, an enhancement can help to like fine tune the cornea's shape even further. And that results in more, optimal vision for that person.
Huh. Our eyes, much like our personalities, like to keep things interesting. It makes you wonder, though, if this whole, variability in healing is something that, like, future LASIK technology will be able to predict even better.
That's actually a really interesting thought. And, some of the latest research is actually pointing in that direction. They're using like AI and stuff to analyze individual healing patterns, which could lead to even more precise LASIK procedures and, well, hopefully, more predictable outcomes.
Wow, that's fascinating. It sounds like this field is just constantly evolving. But going back to, what we were saying about different people's eyes healing differently, it seems like that makes that initial conversation with the surgeon even more important. Like you really want to be on the same page with them about expectations and everything.
100%. The source you shared really emphasized that. Having that open and honest conversation right from the start about your hopes for your vision, like what are realistic outcomes, what are the what ifs, all of that should be discussed up front so that you feel really comfortable and prepared.
So don't hold back on those questions during those consultations.
No, not at all. This is your vision we're talking about here, your health. So the more you know, the better, right?
Absolutely. Now, let's say someone does need a LASIK enhancement. What's that like? Is it like going through the whole LASIK process again from the beginning?
It's actually pretty similar in a lot of ways, but there are some key differences. So first off, it's often much quicker. Remember how LASIK involves creating that thin flap on the cornea's surface?
Like lifting a tiny little flap.
Exactly. Well, during a LASIK enhancement, they just lift that same flap to do the touch-ups. They don't have to create a new one. Then they use the laser to make these really tiny, precise adjustments to the cornea. So because it's so targeted, it's actually faster than the first surgery.
Oh, okay. So it's less about like major reshaping and more about like super precise fine tuning at that point.
Yeah, you got it. And the recovery process is very similar too. Same
Mhm.
post-op instructions, the eye drops, all of that. And usually it's about the same amount of downtime. So basically, if someone had a smooth recovery the first time around, the enhancement should be pretty similar.
That's good to know. So speaking of who is and isn't a good candidate for LASIK, what about enhancements? Are there certain things that might make someone ineligible?
Yeah, there are definitely some factors that come into play. So for starters, there's usually a waiting period of like at least 3 months after the initial ESIC. This gives your eyes plenty of time to heal and for your vision to stabilize before they do any further correction.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Rushing anything to do with your eyes seems like a bad idea.
Definitely. And then there's a question of corneal thickness. So LASIK, whether it's the first procedure or an enhancement, it's all about reshaping the cornea, right? But to do that, there needs to be enough corneal tissue to work with. The research I looked at said something like 450 to 550 microns is a typical range, but it can vary depending on the person and the specific technology used.
Microns. How tiny are we talking here exactly?
Yeah.
For those of us who aren't like eye doctors.
Right, so a micron is just 1,000th of a millimeter.
Wow. Okay.
It's tiny. But that just shows you how precise these procedures are. So if someone's cornea is too thin, they might not be a good candidate for LASIK enhancement. Or for that matter, they might not even be a good candidate for LASIK in the first place.
Wow. So corneal thickness is clearly a really important factor. What else do they look at?
Let's see. A few things could potentially rule someone out. So pregnancy, for example.
Huh.
Hormonal changes during pregnancy can actually affect your eyes, believe it or not. So usually it's recommended to wait until after pregnancy and breastfeeding to even consider any type of refractive surgery.
Gotcha.
And then there are certain medications that could be a concern, particularly those that, might interfere with healing. And then, of course, any pre-existing health conditions, especially those affecting the eyes, would need to be carefully evaluated.
So yeah, this is definitely not a decision to be made lightly. It sounds like those open and honest conversations with your eye doctor are just so crucial throughout this whole process.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that sweet spot. What's best, what's safest for each person's eyes. And speaking of individual situations, let's talk about costs. That's a big one for a lot of people when it comes to LASIK. So is the same true for enhancements?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. We all know LASIK isn't exactly easy on the wallet, so what's the deal with enhancements?
Well, the tricky thing is there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. The cost of an enhancement can really vary.
Like, what kind of factors are we talking about here?
Okay, so some providers, they actually include enhancements in the initial cost of LASIK, especially if it's done like within a certain time frame, say the first year or something. But then others might charge a separate fee, and that can be, it could be a small percentage of what you paid originally, or it could be. It could be a lot more. It really just depends on their policy.
So, no assumptions allowed. Definitely got to clear that up beforehand.
Oh, for sure. Always have that conversation up front about costs, like what exactly is included, what are the potential extra costs, do they offer payment plans? I mean, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears for a minute. We've talked about what LASIK enhancement is, why someone might need it, who's a good candidate. But what if LASIK enhancement isn't an option?
Yeah.
Or, maybe someone's just curious and they want to explore all the possibilities. What other types of vision correction procedures are out there?
Oh, that's where it gets really interesting. So beyond LASIK and enhancements, there's actually a whole range of other procedures. It's like a menu of vision correction options these days.
A menu, huh? Tell me more. I'm intrigued.
All right, so one option is PRK, which stands for photorefractive keratectomy. It's kind of like LASIK's predecessor, actually. Been around for a while, and it's still a very trusted procedure.
Okay, so it stood the test of time. How's it different from LASIK?
So instead of creating that flap in the cornea like they do in LASIK, PRK involves gently removing the very outermost layer of the cornea. It's called the epithelium, and they use the laser to do the correction after that. It usually means a slightly longer recovery time, but it can be a really great option for people who, say, have thinner corneas or for some reason aren't the best candidate for LASIK.
Interesting. Sounds like a more gradual approach, maybe. What else is on this menu of yours?
Okay, so next up we have refractive lens exchange, or RLE. Now this one's a little different. Instead of reshaping the cornea, RLE actually involves replacing the eye's natural lens with an artificial one.
Wait, replacing the whole lens? That sounds pretty intense.
It sounds more intense than it actually is. RLE is incredibly safe, incredibly effective, and it's especially good for people who have more, how do I put it, more advanced vision problems, or maybe they're just not a suitable candidate for those corneal-based procedures like LASIK or PRK.
So it's like a more permanent solution for certain vision issues.
You could say that, and it has this added benefit of addressing cataracts if those develop later down the line. Kind of like a, two birds, one stone kind of deal for your eyes.
Okay. RLE, got it. What else? You mentioned a whole menu.
All right, well, we've also got SMILE. And yes, it is as nice as it sounds. It stands for small incision lenticule extraction. It's actually one of the newer vision correction procedures out there. And like LASIK, it uses a laser to reshape the cornea, but they do it through a much smaller incision.
Oh, so less invasive, quicker healing time, all of that.
Exactly. Smaller incisions generally mean faster healing, less discomfort. And then last but not least, we have phakic intraocular lenses, or IOLs. These are implantable lenses, and they basically work together with your eye's natural lens to correct your vision.
So instead of replacing the lens like an RLE, it's more like giving your natural lens a little boost.
Exactly. It's like giving your eyes a high-tech upgrade. But the point is, if for whatever reason LASIK enhancement isn't an option, or like you said, you're just curious about what else is out there, there are a lot of different paths you can take to achieve clearer vision.
Yeah, it really is amazing how far vision correction has come. Sounds like there's a solution for almost everyone these days.
It's true. And speaking of solutions, that research you shared also had some really great tips for maintaining good eye health after LASIK. And, these tips, they're good for everyone, really, LASIK or no LASIK.
Oh, absolutely. But preventing problems in the first place, can't go wrong with that. So what were some of the golden nuggets of wisdom?
Well, first and foremost, they emphasize the importance of regular eye exams. I know it seems obvious, but so many people they don't do it. They neglect their eye health.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Unfortunately, yeah. But those regular checkups, I mean, that's how you catch things early on when they're usually much easier to treat.
Prevention is key.
Yes.
So what else should people keep in mind?
Diet plays a huge role. Eating a diet that's rich in antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids can work wonders for your eyes. Think leafy greens, colorful fruits and veggies, fatty fish like salmon. And then, of course, quitting smoking if you do smoke, or even better, never starting. That's good advice for your overall health, but your eyes especially will thank you for that.
Hard to argue with that. What about all the screen time most of us are exposed to these days?
Such a good point. Avoiding eye strain is more important now than ever. So, taking frequent breaks, adjusting your screen brightness, using artificial tears, all those things can help combat the effects of, staring at screens for hours on end. And then finally, never underestimate the power of a good pair of sunglasses. Protecting your eyes from those harmful UV rays is crucial.
Sunglasses, fashionable and functional.
Exactly. Essential for healthy vision, I'd say.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive into LASIK enhancement, I'm struck by how much of this process boils down to just being informed and really advocating for your own eye health.
Totally. It's all about, getting all the info, asking the right questions, making sure you feel confident in the decisions you're making for your vision.
Well said. Now, before we go, we want to leave you with something to ponder. So if you were considering LASIK, would the possibility of needing an enhancement affect your decision at all? And if so, how?
That's a good question to think about. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, but ultimately, the decision of whether or not to go ahead with LASIK or really any elective medical procedure is a personal one. So gather your information, weigh the pros and cons, and most importantly, talk to your eye doctor. Have that open and honest conversation. Your vision is precious, so treat it that way.
It's incredible, really. So many options for people who, are looking for better vision these days.
No, it really is amazing. But I think the thing is, no matter what path you choose, like whether it's LASIK or something else, the key is just understanding, the details, knowing what to expect, like we've been talking about with LASIK enhancement.
Exactly. So as we wrap up here, let's bring it back to our main topic. We've talked about what LASIK enhancement is, why you might need it. But for someone listening, thinking, okay, this is all great information, but what do I do with it?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there are two big takeaways here. So number one, I think it just really highlights how important it is to choose a LASIK surgeon who's experienced and, someone you trust. Talk to them honestly about what you're hoping to achieve with LASIK, and don't be shy about asking, like, what's your policy on enhancements?
It's about being your own advocate.
100%.
Yeah.
And then the second takeaway, I think, is just realizing that, vision correction, it's not a one and done kind of thing. It requires like ongoing care and attention, whether or not you ever even have LASIK. Regular eye exams, a healthy lifestyle, protecting your eyes. Those things are all investments in your long-term vision.
So it's like anything else, right? You got to be proactive.
Exactly. It's your vision, your health. Ultimately, it's your life. So be informed, ask those questions, make good decisions, and enjoy those clear sights for years to come.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That does it for our deep dive into LASIK enhancement and the world of vision correction.